So there's my bio. And I've been giving Cave Hill tours. I gave Cave Hill tours for about 17 years, from 2002 to 2019. I actually initiated the Cave Hill tours back in 2002. And here are some photographs of some of the tours that I've done over the years. I've given hundreds of tours of Cave Hill. So here's Cave Hill in the winter with the lake frozen over. And that's what it looks like today in the summertime. So Cave Hill is about 2.5 miles from 6th and Jefferson, or downtown Louisville. So there's the route there. And if we were building Cave Hill today, well, if we go back, Cave Hill was founded in 1848. And it was way far away from downtown Louisville. If you were to ride a horse from City Hall, which is at 6th and Jefferson, out to Cave Hill, I'm guessing it's going to take 20-25 minutes for you to ride that horse back in 1848 to get out to Cave Hill. It's that far out of downtown. Now then, today, in 2025, if you get in a car at 6th and Jefferson, and you go and get on I-71, and went up I-71 20 or 25 minutes, where would you be? You'd be up in Oldham County, correct? When you looked around, all you would see is agricultural land. You would see cows, sheep, whatever, grazing. And that's what you would have seen back in 1848 at Cave Hill. It was farmland back in those days. So Cave Hill was way, way far away from the city. Now, why on earth would they have put a cemetery that far away from the city? Main reason was they didn't know what these people were dying from. They didn't want to bury them, quote, in the backyard. And so they put them far away on the Cave Hill farm back in 1848.
Who owned the property in Cave Hill?
Here is the general location of Cave Hill. You have the main gate, the Grinstead Gate, and the administration building, which is in the center of the cemetery. It's kind of odd. Most administration buildings are at the front gate, but here they're in the center. Now then, here's a graphic of the site plan of Cave Hill, and this is the reason why you get lost in Cave Hill. All of the roads follow the topography of the curves. All the roads are curvilinear when you drive through Cave Hill, and there's a lot of hills in Cave Hill. Here is original map of Cave Hill Cemetery back in the 1800s, mid-1800s, of how Cave Hill was laid out. And here are the two individuals responsible for creating Cave Hill. You have Benjamin Grove. He was a landscape designer. He was responsible for all the botanical, horticultural trees and shrubs there at Cave Hill. And then Edmund Lee was the road planner. He planned the roads to follow the contours of the earth there in Cave Hill. So you can blame Edmund Lee for getting lost in Cave Hill. Here are some historic photographs of Cave Hill back in the 1800s. Again, hardly any trees or shrubs or bushes. I mean, look at it. It's pretty much all monuments, right? Here's a good example. This was a funeral of William Heft back in 1898. Notice the one monument there. You hardly see any other monuments around. That's what it looks like today. It's kind of grown up over the past 74, 5 years or so, 6 years. Cave Hill has matured, if you will. Here's the historic shelter house. It used to be a guard house. It's been used for a variety of purposes over the year. It's still existing. Folklore says that the wood on this shelter house is original. Me as an architect, I tend to doubt that, but that's what I hear, that the wood is still original from the late 1800s when this was built. It's still there. Here are some more photographs of the entrance to Cave Hill, very picturesque. And here are some scenic vistas. This is the cave of Cave Hill. So here you have the main lake. The administration building is there in the distance. You can see the spire of it there. The cave is right here, the cave. And Cave Hill is misnamed. We have one cave, many hills. It should be Cave Hills Cemetery. Cave Hill is very protective of its monuments. It's very well, has a good endowment. If any monuments get damaged, they will fix the monuments. Hopefully you have a endowment that will help preserve your monument. But here's the statue of James Lithgow Jr. This is James Lithgow Sr. He was a former mayor of Louisville, and his son passed away. And so when he had Michael Muldoon create this monument for his son in Cave Hill. In fact, this monument was intended for a grave site in Macon, Georgia. So this monument that you see right here was created for a person, I think it was Joseph Bond in Macon, Georgia. But it was done during the Civil War, and so Michael Muldoon, the monument maker, could not ship it down to Macon, Georgia due to the Civil War, so he put it on James Lithgow Jr.'s gravesite. So that was, after the Civil War, Michael Muldoon created a duplicate monument and sent it down to Rose Hill Cemetery in Macon, Georgia, where it was installed for Joseph Bond. This is what it looks like today. You'll note very closely that it doesn't, there's some things missing off of this monument. It's missing all the statuary. And the arm of the Archangel Gabriel has been broken off.
Oh.
Rose Hill Cemetery in Macon only has a minimal staff, like 1 or so people. Cave Hill has a lot of maintenance staff, a lot of security, and thus we want to keep, as I say, Cave Hill financially viable into the future so that it has the resources to protect monuments like this James Lithgow Jr. monument. But yeah, Rose Hill down in Macon, unfortunately, has been vandalized due to the lack of security and maintenance.
It's not even September 7th. Yeah.
So here we go into some monument symbols. So as you drive through Cave Hill, you'll see all different types of what we call Victorian type monuments. They have all different types of symbols on them. So what do they mean? Here's a good example. A lot of times when you're driving through, you see a monument that looks like it's broken in half, that the top part of it's missing. You might also notice that it has an anchor on it as well. What's that all about? What's the stump and anchor mean of this monument? What it means is that this person was cut off in the prime of life, usually a young adult, maybe a teenager or in their 20s. So that's what the cut off monument represents. The anchor represents a Victorian symbol for a woman. She was the anchor of the family. So whenever, not so much maritime or navy or anything like that, or sailor, it was for the anchor of the family, which was the woman. So, and sometimes, if you go into the history and find out who this monument is for, more than likely it was a young woman who died early, and more than likely it was of childbirth. That's usually what these type monuments mean. Fortunately, healthcare has come a long way since then, but back in the Victorian times, there was a lot of issues associated with childbirth.
You don't know who that was for?
Not this one here, but I've looked into them in the past, and that's usually what it's for, is young women. You also see monuments like this obelisk here that's draped. An obelisk was an Egyptian symbol for eternal life, and the draping means mourning, sadness for the person that passed away. So that's usually what that represents in Victorian. And you may also see what we call torches, these flames, these torch flames, with the flame pointed down at the base. If you see how that flame is at the very bottom, the torch is turned upside down. In fact, when you go through the main gates of Cave Hill Cemetery, you see these large torches upside down. And you also see torches upside down on various Victorian monuments as well. And what that means is end of life. You're putting out the flame of a death, sort of a reference, if you will. So that's some of the Victorian symbols. There's tons of Victorian symbols out there. All you need to do if you want to find out more is to go on Google, just Google cemetery symbols, and you can read about the symbols all day long about all that. But anyways, those are some of the basic ones that we have there. Again, Cave Hill, very beautiful, especially this time of year, the fall of the year. I always tell people to go to Cave Hill either in the late April or late October when the spring colors, fall colors are at their peak. It's spectacular, Cave Hill. This is the famous ginkgo of Cave Hill. It'll be turning this golden color end of October, early November. And if you know anything about ginkgos, they drop all their leaves at one time. I call it a golden snow on the ground. Beautiful. This ginkgo here is somewhat legendary. There's folklore about it, about how it got into Cave Hill. I've looked into all that folklore and I can't verify any of that. But anyways, a beautiful tree, and just love the fall color. I always go to Cave Hill in late October to see this golden snow. Wildlife, Cave Hill has a whole host of wildlife. We used to have a peacock. The peacock hasn't been around for a number of years. They fly, actually, peacocks actually fly, and they can fly away. Of course, the geese and all, the ducks. We used to have a turkey at Cave Hill, but unfortunately the coyote got the turkey a few years ago for Thanksgiving dinner, and that didn't turn out well for the turkey. Huge fish in the lakes. Boy, you wouldn't believe all the huge fish. Of course, the geese and the swans. The swans show up. Swans do fly, and they come and they go there at Cave Hill. So a lot of nice wildlife. As mentioned earlier, we have coyote there and deer. One time I was leading a tour through Cave Hill, and someone said, "Oh, look at that big buck deer up on the hillside there, that statue." And I look up, it wasn't a big buck, it was an actual big buck. It was a big buck, what do you want to call it, a doe or deer. It wasn't a monument at all. And so deer are always through Cave Hill.
Wow.
Yeah, it's something
Cave
else.
Hill does not supply all the little
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah,
I mean, like the turkey or the
yeah, they're
chick-
all free. They come and they go.
Oh.
And here's some more scenic vistas of Cave Hill. It's just spectacular. By the way, when it snows, they usually close down the cemetery. You cannot get inside Cave Hill for obvious reasons, the roads. Some of the famous people at Cave Hill, Enid Yandel, a very sculptor person of Cave Hill. I think she has one of the best spots in the cemetery. She has this beautiful vista across the lake, and very appropriate for her being an artist. Here's Enid Yandel in her studio. She was responsible for Hogan's Fountain, the Daniel Boone statue. She studied under Auguste Rodin in Paris, France. She did statuary at the Chicago World's Fair. One of her most famous statues was the Confederate Memorial, which used to be over at U of L.
Oh, yeah.
Now, her design was not built. She won the competition, but what you see right here that's not Enid's design. That's someone else's. This is Enid's design there on the right. So she won the national competition. So let me ask you all, why was her design, when she won the competition, why was it not built?
Was she a Confederate?
First, they said it wasn't structurally sound. Well, if you can build this on the left, I think you can build that on the right. There was an alleged bias that the Confederate Women's Association sponsored the competition, so you couldn't have women picking women, right? Men would never do that, of course, but they said there was a bias because of the Women's Association. The third reason was the Confederate men did not want a woman designing their monument. Which of those reasons do you think would be most recent why they would not have done that?
Huh.
Because it was leaning towards the Confederate.
3, I would agree. Yes, 3, if you're very cynical, I think 3 is the correct answer.
Excuse me, on the right there, on that,
I'll come back to the comment at the end, okay? This is Barney Bright and his wife, Gail. Barney got his monument up before he went. He always had this monument up in his artist studio. He depicts himself very at an advanced age, and his wife Gail at a very youthful age. I'll let y'all decide how that plays out, but very interesting. And Barney, of course, designed many famous sculptures of Louisville. The Louisville clock there on the right. These sculptures here, this one on the left is the Search over in New Albany Library. On the right is called River Horse, which is down near 6th and Chestnut in front of the Federal Building. The Sandra Twist monument there as you come in the Grinstead Gate. It's not too far from there. Very beautiful monument that he did for Sandra Twist. She was a UK model, cheerleader and all that. She died in a car accident. I think she was 40 years old in the accident. And then, of course, the Joseph Urban White Memorial there. It's a beautiful one. I always enjoy seeing that Barney created. Here are some other monuments. The Harry Collins Magician on the right, Sherry Applegate here on the left. Some other legends of Cave Hill. George Rogers Clark, founder of Louisville in Cave Hill. The Churchill family plot, Churchill Downs. Denny Crum, the famous basketball coach of Louisville. Pete Browning, who cracked the bat, and the Louisville Slugger has been hitting home runs ever since. And in the lower right-hand corner is Derek Smith, who was a famous University of Louisville basketball player who died way too young. I think he had a heart condition on a cruise ship and passed away too young. Muhammad Ali passed away in 2016. Just a phenomenal grave site here, burial site for Muhammad. Every so often I go by, someone has sprinkled red rose petals up and down the stairway leading to his burial
Excuse
spot.
me, who keeps up the flowers and everything? The
Yeah,
family?
Cave Hill staff maintains all that.
The what?
Cave Hill staff. But if you can hold your comments till the end, we'll address those at the end if that's possible. So anyways, and this is some terminology from what Muhammad Ali would say. Colonel Harlan Sanders, he was not actually from Kentucky.
No.
He was a Hoosier from Henryville, Indiana, which is just north of Louisville. And he was not a colonel, military colonel. He was an honorary Kentucky colonel. And I always say that he was buried the traditional way. He was not cremated, or else he'd be extra crispy. I'll leave y'all decide if that's appropriate or not to say, but I'm sure the colonel would get a laugh out of that. Perhaps the most famous people buried in Cave Hill are the Happy Birthday sisters, the Hill sisters. Mildred and Patty are buried there in Cave Hill. Very sort of low-key monuments that they have. But their Happy Birthday to You song is one of the most popular around the world. I've heard it sung in all different languages. I was over in Rome, Italy one day, and they were singing it in Italian. Last year I was in Hawaii, and they actually had a hula dance based on Happy Birthday to You. So a very popular song, and the Hill Sisters were from Louisville. The curious irony about their gravesite, though, is even if you were there on the date of their birthdays, you would not know it. You know why? There is no month or day listed on their monuments, just the year of 1864 and 1858, I think is the other. So even if you were there on their birthday, you couldn't sing Happy Birthday to them because you wouldn't know, because it's not listed. So I always tell people, please put your full dates on your monuments.
Where'd the name Cave Hill come from?
Because of the cave, I mentioned that earlier. There's one cave, many hills at Cave Hill. Yeah, you may have missed that slide early on, but I did discuss that. Cave Hill is misnamed, one cave, many hills.
That's beautiful.
This is the Bingham family plot. The Binghams were very famous socialites and editors, a media empire that they had here in Louisville. And here's where everyone is buried. Robert Worth Bingham, the patriarch of the families, there in the center. Barry Bingham Sr., very famous. Barry Bingham Jr. Henrietta Bingham, there was a book written on her life, and she's buried there as well. Very great book on Henrietta Bingham. I've read it, and very excellent if you want to know more about the Jazz Age and the early 1900s here in Louisville. It's an excellent book on her life, but that's the Binghams. We were talking about mausoleums early on and beautiful sites. Here's a mausoleum and some beautiful grave sites there.
That's in the spring.
And the co-founders of Humana are buried at Cave Hill. Wendell Cherry, who unfortunately was very young, he was about 56 years old when he passed away. He has a beautiful site there. There's a Humana building which Wendell Cherry and David Jones commissioned from Michael Graves there. David and Betty Jones were buried there. They died within like 1 month of each other. She passed away August 16th, 2019. He passed away September 18th, 2019. So what, within a month of each other they passed away. I worked for David and Wendell at Humana. One interesting thing, if you ever go to David Jones' memorial site, he has this bench there, and the bench has books in the stone pillars there. David was really big into education, and so the books there represent his love of reading and knowledge. There's also I think this is a Barney Bright sculpture that's there on the site. Wendell Cherry was big into the Kentucky Center for the Arts, making sure that that got built. And then David Jones with 21st Century Parks and the Parklands of Floyd's Fork got that going. So they not only did a great healthcare company, but also civically did a lot of great things for Louisville. And they're buried not very far from each other there in Cave Hill. Again, mausoleums, talking about those earlier, just beautiful, beautiful mausoleums. I always like when I go through a historic cemeteries looking at the mausoleums. And Cave Hill, I think, has some of the best.
The lower right, that is beautiful.
Yeah, they are very nice.
People are buried in there?
That is correct. Here is the columbarium. The columbarium is for cremation. I may have mentioned earlier that cremation now is 50% or greater of the burials in all cemeteries, not only Cave Hill, but other cemeteries. Cremation is now one of the big popular ways of being buried. At Cave Hill, they have a columbarium where cremation urns can be, it's like a little art museum in there. It's phenomenal. If you ever get to go into a columbarium, that's great. They also have cremation gardens where they scatter the ashes. They can do that. They have these little granite planter sort of things that they have throughout the cemetery. So I always get the question like, will Cave Hill ever be full? And I don't think so. With cremation, it'll always be there. Cave Hill has almost 300 acres. I failed to mention that earlier. But it's actually 292 acres that they have. But I want to say of the developed property, it's probably 50–60% that they have currently developed. So, and with cremation, I don't think they'll ever run out of space there. The Satterwhites is perhaps the most picturesque monument at Cave Hill. You can see it has these white azaleas that go around it that bloom in the spring. You have Preston Pope Satterwhite and his wife Florence there. So this is also the largest grave site at Cave Hill. Not only the most picturesque, but it's the largest. It's 1/3 of an acre. And Preston and Florence are buried there. There's one other person there that I won't get into. But so only basically 2 or so people buried on this grave site. So who are the Satterwhites and why do they have such a large area there? Well, Preston was Florence's second husband. Her first husband was a guy by the name of James Martin. And most of you have no idea who James Martin was, but you would know who his business partner was. His business partner was a guy by the name of John D. Rockefeller in Standard Oil. Unfortunately for James Martin, he met a tragic end in New York City during a car accident in the early 1900s. And Florence, his widow, was comforted by the family physician. Who was the family physician? Preston Pope Satterwhite. And thus they lived happily ever after, if you will, with James Martin's inheritance. And they did a lot of good things with it. They traveled Europe. They purchased a lot of tapestries and sculptures. And if you go to the Speed Art Museum, they have what's called the Satterwhite Wing there. And there's a little bust of Preston Pope Satterwhite in that wing. And they have this little description, a little Cliff Notes description of what I just told you about how they came about the money. Talked about Dr. Satterwhite was a doctor there in New York. He married Florence Brokaw Martin. She was the widow of a Standard Oil executive, and their fortune financed their grand living and grand collecting, as it mentions there. I've always said to the Speed, says a satellite gallery, it should be called the Martin Gallery, but that's just me. But anyways, yeah, so that's who the satellites were and why they have such a grand. By the way, this monument here for the satellites is based on Marie Antoinette's Temple of Love in Versailles, France. How do we in Kentucky say Versailles? Versailles, that is correct. So anyways, it's based on Marie Antoinette's Versailles Temple of Love in Versailles, France, in Paris. This is the Caldwell Sisters, another very significant, distinctive monument in Cave Hill. Unfortunately, I should have updated these photographs. Cave Hill has gone through and they've updated this statue. It's all nice and cleaned and white marble now. But anyways, Caldwell Sisters, they were from Louisville. They married European royalty over in Europe, and they inherited a lot of money from their parents. In fact, their father was a guy by the name of William Shakespeare Caldwell, and he owned a bunch of natural gas companies back in the mid-1800s. Natural gas was the electricity back in those days, the electricity of cooking your food. The gas would cook your food, light your lights, do a lot of things. And if you look at their monument here on either side, you see these little stone flames there. That represents the natural gas where they got their money from. So that's a little tip off there about the monument. But anyways, the Caldwell Sisters, very distinctive monument. Oh, I did include it. There you go. There it is, all white. So you can see how it kind of deteriorated over the years. Now, there it is, all clean and up to speed. I love this monument here. A lot of interesting, whenever you go through Cave Hill, you're always finding something new and different. Here's a good example. This is the Thompson Family Tree Monument. So you have the main trunk of the tree there, and all the headstones are like little branches off of that tree. Very creative. I'm not sure who came up with this, but this is in section 5 of Cave Hill, and I always enjoy looking at it. It was just whoever came up with that concept of family genealogy, very genealogy oriented, if you will. Here's a good one. So when you're driving through Cave Hill, you see all these beautiful monuments. Like, who are these people, and how can he afford these beautiful monuments? So one of them I decided to look into. I looked into James and Moni Shuttleworth's monument. I've always thought this was a very classic design for their monument. I said, gosh, who are the Shuttleworths? Never heard of that name before. What did they do? So I Googled Shuttleworth, Louisville, and the first entry that popped up was Titanic. It's like, oh geez, well that gets my attention right away. What do they have associated with the Titanic? Turns out that James Shuttleworth was over in Europe. He owned a clothing store here in Louisville. He was buying a lot of clothing over in Europe for his store here in Louisville, and he was headed back to America on the Carpathia. He was on the recovery ship of the Titanic, and actually he gave some money to some of the widows there on board of the ship. So that's how he got tied into the Titanic. So he was actually there in that epic moment as such. So anyways, you never know who these people are, but once you get, everyone has a very interesting story to tell. As Cave Hill says, there's over 137,000 people buried at Cave Hill, and there's 137,000 unique stories at Cave Hill as well. Here's a good one, Brittany Bevan. This is called the Smiling Jesus Memorial. Brittany Bevan actually is there in the monument. There she is. She's holding a little child on her back. She was a teenager when she unfortunately had a tragic accident on Lexington Road, which she passed away on. And her family created this beautiful monument in her memory. Brittany Bevan was the daughter of Matt Bevan, who was once governor of Kentucky. Arthur Loomis. I being an architect, I always like to talk about my architectural brethren. So Arthur Loomis, he created many landmark buildings of Louisville, along with his partner Charles Clark and Loomis. Here are some of the buildings that Clark and Loomis built. The Levy Brothers building, which is now the old spaghetti factory. The old med school, which is now part of, I think, Ronald McDonald House, I think, the old St. Paul's Church there at Brook and Broadway, the Kentucky Science Center, which used to be Carter Dry Goods, Conrad Caldwell House, and the Speed Art Museum. So, and that's just a few. I mean, they've got dozens of signature architecture throughout Louisville, Clark, and Loomis. So I always like to mention them. You also have some interesting monuments like this. It's these folks.
That must be a new one.
These are life-size, by the way. When you get there, they're actually life-size. In fact, the woman on the right, when the monument was installed, she got up next to it, and they said it was a pretty much perfect likeness of her. The gentleman on the left, that is her son, who passed away. I think he was a teenager or so. I do not know how he died, but anyways, that's why he's buried here, and that's the mother there on the right. And now, if you look closely, they have wings and they have swords. So what's that all about? And there's a term for this, and I forget what it was, but it's so that they can defend themselves against evil spirits in the afterlife, from what I understand. Don't hold me to that, but that's what I've been told. But very interesting monument, to say the least. The Belknap hardware people, a lot of Louisvillians have heard of Belknap. William Burke Belknap, the patriarch here, started it in 1841. Here's some Belknap related images. But most of us know of the Belknaps through William Richardson Belknap, who was the son of the patriarch. And when he passed away in 1914, he left a lot of money for educational purposes. And so they took that money and they built the Belknap School, which is off Bardstown Road near Trevilian. The Belknap neighborhood is based around that. And they also took some money and bought this campus for the University of Louisville back in the 1920s. So that's why we call it the Belknap campus to this day, is they used the Belknap money to buy the land for that.
They had some money.
So here is the Belknap family plot in Cave Hill. There you see it again, William Richardson Belknap's buried there. A lot of the Belknaps are there. Notice these two little crosses here. So that's very unique. What's those crosses doing there? And so on those crosses it says Charles Moorman Jr., 1944. Morris Belknap Moorman, 1944. Both their death dates are 1944. What was going on in 1944?
World War II.
World War II was going on. They were in World War II. If you look on the back side of those monuments, it says killed in action, Normandy, France, World War II. So what happened with that? So their father was a guy by the name of Charles Moorman. Charles married Lily Belknap, and they had two children, which was Charles and Morris. There they had two children. And the father, Charles Moorman Sr., passed away earlier. He had a heart attack in the 1930s. He was a judge, actually, a district judge or so, and he died of a heart attack. So he wasn't around when World War II came about. The Belknap family was always very patriotic. Belknaps always were in all the major wars, Civil War, Revolutionary War, you name it. Belknaps were always there. So they were in college down in Tennessee at the time, and they knew that the war was winding down. And so they wanted to be in the Belknap, wanted to be very patriotic. They just volunteered, just out of the blue. Hey, we're going to join the Army. There you go. And they were millionaires, by the way, as well. And so they were sent off to the front lines. Unfortunately, again, their father had passed away, who could not have, helped guide them better in their decision of how they went into the military. But they were very patriotic. They joined in. Now, then, they were not part of the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. They were not part of that. Believe it or not, it took them months from the D-Day invasion to get into Paris. It took them like 3, 4, even more months to get into that. And so they were killed, I think, in August and September in Normandy, France, as part of the ongoing invasion there. They were twins, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that either. They were both born in 1925, I think, if I get that right. Yeah, 1925. So they were, 19 years old. So can you imagine Lily, their mother, getting that knock on the door, the first one, and then the other was killed like 3 weeks later, and getting that knock again 3 weeks later. So again, very patriotic Americans, Belknaps, and so telling the story about them. Here they are here. There's photographs. That's Charles on the left and Morris on the right.
The twins.
When I was doing this, I contacted the university down in Swanee, Tennessee, is where they were going to school down there in Swanee. I forget the name. It was School of the South, something. Anyways, College of the South. I contacted them, and they didn't know who the Belknaps or the Mormons were, but this one research assistant was very helpful. She goes, Steve, I'll see what I can find out about them, and she came up with these photographs of them from their school days. And their names are down on the World War II monument down at 5th and Jefferson. Andrew Cowan, another major military hero of Louisville. This is his obituary that appeared in the New York Times, believe it or not. New York Times took notice of his passing there in 1919. This is Andrew Cowan. He was actually born in Scotland, and he moved to New York as a child, and he served in the Union Army. What happened on July 3rd, 1863? Anyone know what happened on that day? Very fateful day in American history.
Lincoln was
No,
shot.
no, it was the Battle of Gettysburg. Battle of Gettysburg, July 3rd, 1863, and Andrew Cowan was there. In fact, not only was he there, he was in the heart of the battle. He was in the very middle of the battle. He was at what was called the Corps of Trees. It's right over here, over there. He was literally in the very center of all that mayhem going on there that day at Gettysburg. He was there. And he helped repel Pickett's charge as they came up the hill that day, that fateful day at Gettysburg. In fact, here's a little description of Pickett's charge, and Andrew Cowan's name is referenced there. He headed up a cannon battery. You can see the photograph of his battery up there in the upper right-hand corner. And he told his men, he had like 8 or 10 cannons, and he told his men, wait till you see the whites of their eyes. As they were coming up the hill, bullets were flying past him. He actually had bullet holes in his uniform. Bullets were flying left and right around him, but he told his men, hold your fire until they get close enough, and then he let them have it. And there's a monument there at Gettysburg about Andrew Cowan and his heroism that day. And on the 150th anniversary of Gettysburg, which we just had not too long ago, I got to write this editorial about Andrew Cowan in the Courier-Journal that appeared. So very faithful day. Andrew Cowan, after the war, he came back to Louisville, and he did something very significant. Not only was he at Gettysburg, but he did something very significant here in Louisville. This is it right here. This is an early map of our Olmsted Park system, Frederick Law Olmsted. Andrew Cowan helped lead the effort to establish that park system here in Louisville.
Yes, he did.
So Cowan helped save the Union and gave us these beautiful parks here in Louisville.
Yeah.
At Cave Hill, they have the National Cemetery there. Over 5,500 soldiers are buried in Cave Hill. A lot of them were wounded or killed at the Battle of Perryville, which happened on October 7th and 8th, 1862. It was our Gettysburg. It's when the Confederates came up from the south into Kentucky, and the Union Army fought them off. And so when you go here at the National Cemetery in Cave Hill, when you look at the dates, a lot of the dates are in October of 1862, because a lot of them were wounded, and they were brought to the hospitals in Louisville where they subsequently died. And so they're buried here at Cave Hill, over 5,500 overall. At Cave Hill, they have their military people buried there from the Revolutionary War up to today's wars. They have the whole spectrum of American military history buried here at Cave Hill. We also have a Confederate section there. Over 200 Confederates are buried at Cave Hill. They primarily died of disease and other ailments. usually hanging by the neck. They're at the military prison at 10th and Broadway. They're buried here. And they're buried under what's called the Union symbol. The Union symbol is this arched symbol. It's arched. The Confederate symbol is like what you see here in the center, that I call it the pediment. It's pointed top. The Confederates have their symbol is pointed top. The Union is curved top. And so that's why they were buried by the Union troops, and that's why they have the curved tops. A lot of the Confederate descendants doing genealogy will come to Cave Hill to find their ancestor, and they're kind of, oh my gosh, they're buried under the Union symbol, and that's why they pay for a Confederate symbol there. Good example of that is Elizabeth Timms. She's the only woman buried in the Confederate plot there at Cave Hill. This was her headstone. Again, you see it's the curved top. So what's the story about Elizabeth Timms? Why is she the only Confederate woman buried at Cave Hill? Well, she owned her and her husband owned a farm in Calhoun, Georgia, and the husband went off with the Confederate troops, and he was gone. Elizabeth was there on the farm, and Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, was coming down on his march to the sea through Atlanta to burn Atlanta and all that, and there were a lot of Confederates on the Timms farm, and she helped them to escape from Sherman's men. So she helped them get out of there, you know, protect them. Well, Sherman did not like that. And so he ordered Elizabeth Timms to be arrested and brought to the military prison here in Louisville, and where she came. Unfortunately, she contracted a disease and died there in the prison. Sometime after, I think it was in the 1880s or so, the Courier-Journal ran a story about Elizabeth Timms and talked about her being the only Confederate woman there in Cave Hill. And her husband had come back from the war, came to the farm and realized she was not there, and had no idea what had happened to her. And that's how he found out that Elizabeth was here at Cave Hill. Now then, some of us historians decided that we thought Elizabeth should have a better headstone than what we got here. So we all pitched in. We bought a new headstone for her here. It's under the Confederate symbol, of course. It's also called Bury Me With My People. That was her last words when she was dying. She wanted to be buried with her Confederate folks. And so that's what that's about. And one last monument, bring you up to date. Here's a very picturesque monument, one very nice one just near the Grinstead Gate. It's for John Jack Zender, and he was a military pilot during World War II. He ended up owning a mechanical company, did very well at it. He was also had a law degree, but he was into thoroughbreds. He did all sorts of, he was just a phenomenal person. And so he has this beautiful mausoleum, as well as this beautiful statue that was created by Wyatt Gregg. I've got it listed up there. And his dance partner, him, I take it was his wife, per the obituary. It doesn't quite, it's not clear enough in the obituary, but he and her were together for 70 years. And so they had this beautiful dancing statuette made for them. Very beautiful. Now then, how not to get lost in Cave Hill. I always end my talks on this. Everyone says, how do I go to Cave Hill and I get lost? If you pay attention to the lines painted on the roadway, you won't get lost. The solid white line connects the front gate to the Grinstead Gate. So it's a solid white line. If you get lost, look for the solid white line, and no matter which way you turn, you're going to get out. However, the yellow line, which is depicted right here, the yellow line goes from the Grinstead Gate to Colonel Sanders' gravesite. It used to be the most visited gravesite in Cave Hill, was the yellow line. So the guards didn't have to try to direct people, just follow the yellow line. Of course, now the most visited gravesite at Cave Hill is Muhammad Ali, and he's got a green line. And the green line starts over by the administration building, just off the white line, solid white line. There's a green line that comes off that, and that leads you back to Muhammad's gravesite. Now then, you're back in the cemetery and you don't see anything going on. Look for the white dashed lines. Follow those and they lead you back to the solid white line, and then you get out from there. Got that? Do we need a quiz on that? But anyways, look for the lines. As long as you're following the lines around, you can get yourself out. I'll never forget, we were doing a twilight tour. We had the gates closed, it was pitch black, very dark, and we see headlights back in the cemetery driving around. Someone was lost, they got locked into the cemetery, and they literally had to follow my tour out to get out the gates. So yeah, we've had those episodes as well at Cave Hill.
Ooh, scary.
So anyways, here's the administration building at Cave Hill. Great friendly staff. If you were looking for any history on Cave Hill or just talk to someone, these people inside at the administration building, very friendly. They'll tell you whatever you need to know. There's actually restrooms there as well. So anyways, great staff there at Cave Hill. Last but not least, if you're looking for someone buried at Cave Hill, again, I mentioned earlier, there's 137,000 folks there. On the main page, the main web page of Cave Hill, if you scroll all the way down, you see a thing called Burial Record Search, and you click on that, and comes up another web page that you put in a name, and then you click search, and it will pop up. It actually has a little map that shows you where that person's buried at. It's very interactive, very cool. Now, I always recommend people to put in the last name of the person. Don't put in their whatever name you think you know them by, because a lot of people go by their middle name or a nickname. I've been fooled many times by putting a regular name and it doesn't pop up. It's like, well, who was this person? So I always say put in the last name and scroll down the list to find who you're looking for. Hopefully it's not a Smith or a Jones. Probably hundreds of those folks at Cave Hill. But anyways, that's a little tip that I use when I search for someone there at Cave Hill. And last but not least, they have a great book on the history of Cave Hill that I highly recommend people to buy by historian Sam Thomas. And they still have regular tours, even though I gave up touring back in 2019. They still do regular tours. In fact, they do golf cart tours now. I used to do the walking tours. That's one reason why I gave up touring at Cave Hill, is walking up and down these hills all the time. At my age, I don't need to be doing that. But they now have golf carts that they put people in and they drive you around in that manner. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed that aspect of Cave Hill. And now we'll entertain questions. Yes, you got a question?
Me?
Yes.